So this is the last of the slides, lectures you're going to have to listen to from me. You may be happy about that. I wish I could have given them to you in person, but this is the Black Death. That's what we're going to be talking about here. So we don't know exactly where and why and how, and there's a lot of stuff we don't know about the Black Death. But we do know that it was one of the worst natural disasters in history. We know that for sure in 1347 there was this plague that swept over Europe, and it's going to cause so much death. Anywhere from one-fourth to one-third of the population of Europe died. Some places even higher than that, and people are going to be terrified, as they, of course, would be. And you're going to have also, well, there's some agreement that the primary way the disease was transmitted was on these backs of black rats. There were oriental rat fleas. Now, how do we come to that conclusion that these are the main culprits? I have a quote here. This is from a really good book called A World Lit Only by Fire by William Manchester. Although there's disagreement as to the exact origins, in October 1347, a Genoese fleet returning from the Orient staggered into Messina harbor with all members of the crew either dead or dying from one version or another of the plague. Okay, so there's disagreement as to the exact origins of the Black Death, but this is a pretty good indicator that, it came from the Orient because all these guys were coming back. So take that for what it's worth, because that's one of the best quotes that I've seen about the thoughts of where did the Black Death come from, and all that. So it's also a really good book if you like medieval history at all. That is actually one of the most interesting books that I've read about that time. Plus, I like the whole title, the concept that we were living in a place where you didn't have the electric lights and just fire. That was it. So anyway, here's a map you can look at if you get a chance, a little bit more. But what it's basically showing you is the spread of the Black Death, and you can look at the colors and you can look at all that. But then notice, the major trade routes, and you notice that some of the places that were in the yellow, which were partially or totally spared from the Black Death, are a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit further away from the trade routes. Look down the far right, down there, close to where it says Constantinople. You see some islands down there, a little bit off. You notice up there, kind of above Nuremberg and a little bit to the east of Hamburg, you see there's another patch where it's a little bit away from the trade routes and so on. So that's just something to consider in terms of when they're looking at where it came from. And we do believe that the trade had so much to do with this. Well, what a lot of people don't know is they don't know that there's three types of the plague. A lot of people just think of the bubonic plague. Well, actually, the bubonic plague is the least of your worries, okay? It's the least of the harmful ones. Now, the three types of the plague are all caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. So, in other words, this is contagious. It's a bacteria. It can infect you. It can infect other people. Now, the bacteria are found mainly on rodents. Now, that includes other things though, like squirrels and other little rodent-like creatures. But it's also in the fleas that feed on them. So other animals and humans can get that bacteria from getting a bite from either the rat or the squirrel or whatever, or bite directly from the fleas. So Yersinia pestis. Now, the bubonic plague has buboes, which are swellings under the arms and the groin. Sometimes they're the size of an apple, sometimes they're bigger, just depends. But the bubonic plague, this is why I say this is the least of your worries, This one does not really spread very often from person to person. Has a 30 to 70% mortality rate, which is a wide range. I mean, pretty much almost like flipping a coin as to whether you're going to live or die if you got that. The fever that you get's pretty hefty, 101 to up to 105. Headache, aching joints, nausea, vomiting, general feeling of despair, like this feeling of depression and sadness. And the bacteria can eventually infect the lymph system. The lymph system becomes inflamed, and then you have these buboes that are going to be in the places where you have lymph nodes. Like I said, the groin, under the armpits, and so on. So without treatment, without antibiotics back then, people would die, if they were going to die, within 4 to 7 days after the infection. Okay, and a lot of people are going to live to tell about it. But again, 1/3, 1/4, depending on where you are, maybe more of Europe's going to die from one of these versions of the plague. Now, again, bubonic plague is the least harmful. Images I found on Google at some point looking for pictures of buboes, because the bubonic plague does still exist in the world today. It's generally more common in less developed countries or the developing world, where they don't have as many medications that are available to them, or whatever. But anyway, there's some pictures of what buboes look like. So lungs, think pneumonia. The pneumonic plague rather, is when the plague infects your lungs. It can spread from person to person through the air, okay, airborne transmission. And in this case, it usually requires pretty direct and close contact. And the pneumonic plague could also occur if you have the bubonic plague and it spreads to your lungs, or if you have the septicemic plague, which you usually don't start with. Okay, we're going to talk about the septicemic. You usually don't start there. But anything, any one of the plagues caused by that Yersinia pestis is going to be pneumonic once it goes to the lungs. Okay, so that had a 90 to 95% mortality rate. And even today, I mean, pneumonia or anything to do with the lungs, I mean, we're watching the COVID-19 thing happen. And it's a respiratory thing. And again, the pneumonic plague, when it hits your lungs, it's really bad. People die these days, today, all the time, of pneumonia. So what are the symptoms here? Slimy sputum tinted with blood, free-flowing sputum that's bright red, onset of pneumonia, shortness of breath, chest pain, cough. And then they said there was a foul smell about the body that was very distinctive, that you would never forget once you smelled it. As I said, the plague, the bacteria that causes it has not been eradicated from the planet. It's just more likely in developing countries. So here's a flow chart that was developed years ago for what to do if you think someone actually has come in from an international flight and they might have the plague, okay, the pneumonic plague. So you can look on there, suspect plague patient, no further action. Suspect plague patient, yes, okay. And then it tells you what to do at every stop there. But if you get a chance, look at that. I have no idea what year that's from, but I mean, airplanes. I keep going back to the airplane thought of, wow, I fly all the time, but I don't know when I'm going to fly again. I need to go visit family, but these days I don't know. I'm not too sure about the mask. I've heard too much about the mask, that the mask, generally you're protecting other people from you, just in case you're in the days of COVID-19, just in case you are infected but you don't know it. You're asymptomatic and you can still spread it through, they say, airborne, and through talking, breathing, they said, if you're too close to people. But yeah, the mask and stuff, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to take a while for the airlines to get back to where they were. And I don't know, you guys. I mean, if we were in person, I would ask you if you think we're ever going to get back to quote normal, end quote. And I don't know. I really don't. I just don't think we are. And if I think there's always going to be something a little bit different. That's just my thought now. Okay. Here's the septicemic. Now, this is the one, like I said, they usually don't start with the septicemic because this is the rare type where the bacteria gets in the blood. You've heard of sepsis, probably. Okay, that means that your blood is completely infected. You're getting really all of your organs are getting blood that is infected, and it's generally sepsis, septicemic plague. Usually, it's going to be fatal. So mortality close to 100%. Symptoms: high fever, chills, weakness, abdominal pain, shock. Skin, though, turning deep shades of blue and purple. And that's because of heart and lung failure, bleeding under the skin, and the organs are, bleeding out in there. Buboes do not develop if you end up with septicemic first. Now, again, it doesn't usually go from person to person because it's bloodborne, and it's usually spread by flea bites. Here's a picture of the hand of a patient who has the plague. It's gone into the blood, and it shows exactly where they got the term the Black Death. Okay, it's coming from this look, this gangrene that is, it's just, again, look at it and you can totally see the skin looks like it's turning black. It's dark purplish, it's bluish, but yeah, I mean that's where they get the term. Here's another picture, someone with the septicemic plague who you see again bleeding into the skin, gangrene. Well, we have to talk about the major results of the plague because so many people die. What's going to happen? Well, number one, there's a massive decline in population. No kidding. Okay, right? At least 25% is thought to have died when it came. It came down to it went from about 1347 to 1352, but the worst of it was going to be 1348 to 1350. So 25% of villages were abandoned. Survivors go to the larger towns and cities, which was a very bad mistake because you've got too many people, you've got more filth, and you also have rats, and that was a bad idea. But I mean, they didn't know any better. The Black Death harms the church because the church power is weakened. Now, the question is why? Well, first of all, the Avignon papacy, we already talked about that, the materialistic guys that were over there in France and so on. And it was seen as not being very effective, very, even by some people, it was seen as completely worldly. So the church is unable to cure the plague no matter what they do. They can't cure the plague. And so it hits monasteries hard because that's where you have a lot of the religious that are living in, like, say, the monasteries. The monks are living there, and they're going to be taking care of the sick. If someone drops a sick person off, I mean, they're going to take care of them and nurse them back to health, or try to comfort them when they die. But they're going to catch it. A lot of the people in the clergy are going to catch the plague as they're trying to help people. So we see also a group called the flagellants. The flagellants were guys that went around and actually beat themselves. Okay? They would have whips or whatever, and they would beat themselves, usually, over their shoulder onto their back till they were bloody. And these guys, during the spread of the Black Death, they're going to come around in all sorts of different places in Europe, and they're going to go from town to town saying that they're trying to do some kind of penance for the sins of the world and so on. But eventually, I mean, you're going to have um, one of the popes in, let's see, it was in the middle of the plague, so it was 1340s, 47, 48, 48, 1348, 1349. You've got one of the popes, Pope Clement VI, who is going to condemn the flagellants because they didn't like the fact that it was just, I mean, it was by these radicals, and they deemed it to be a heresy, right? I mean, the flagellants were, as far as I know, the flagellants were more than just guys who went around and beat themselves, okay? Some of them had joined some other groups, and in those groups, what they were doing is they were actually denying things like the sacraments, taking Holy Communion and all the sacraments. And they were also denying other things while they were at the same time saying that they had the power to work miracles. So the flagellants, they become heretics in the church officially. But, the damage is done there, right? You've got all that going on. And that means that a lot of the progress of the Concordant of Worms, where, remember, it ends, that whole lay investiture controversy is going to be reversed, because as things are changing, and you're going to see people again in high positions, lay people, putting people into offices in the church. Number three, there's also widespread persecution of minorities, especially Jews, because there were rumors that the Jews poisoned the wells. Now, they did not, because they all used the same water, Jews and non-Jews alike, okay? But why were the Jews less likely to get the plague? Well, because they followed the law of Moses. They followed the laws in the Old Testament for cleanliness, okay? Running water and washing, just all of that. They were cleaner. So no, they weren't poisoning the wells. That was a rumor, but it got them put in, walled off places of the cities, ghettos, and just, they were called ghettos, and they're going to call them ghettos in World War II as well, when the Germans do the same thing, the Nazis do the same thing to the Jews. But they're less likely to get the plague because they were following the biblical rules for cleanliness. Now, by no means am I comparing COVID-19 to the Black Plague, at least not at this time. It's not, well, comparable. But I do kind of think we can kind of see number four happening around us at the moment when we're living through a pandemic. The general mood of morbidity, people are kind of like, wow, this is terrible. It's like, man, things are just terrible. Sucks, yeah. So we might as well live for the moment. Now, personally, I'm staying in my house, and I'm being safe, and I'm telling my son, if he goes out and he gets too close to people in the neighborhood, that if he brings that virus into me, I will be so furious. But the thing is, some people don't think like that. They're just like, wow, might as well live for the moment. So eat, drink, and be merry. If we were in class, I would ask you if you know the rest of that. And it's for tomorrow we die. So we have a guy named Giovanni Boccaccio who writes a book called the Decameron. This was a later plague that he actually wrote, the Decameron. But it's a story of some men and women who are trying to escape the plague, and they go off and they hide in one of the people. Well, it's actually young men, young women. They hide in one of their parents' castles or something, trying to escape, trying to stay away, which is actually pretty smart. But what they do to pass the time, because they don't have Netflix, is they're going to be telling each other stories. Again, it's a frame tale, reminiscent of Canterbury Tales, but with the plague. Okay. Again, this was much later plague because the plague is going to return a few times, but never quite as bad as the one from 47, 47-ish to 52-ish, 1347, 52-ish. Now, as part of this idea, that we're all kind of morbid and like, man, everything is so difficult and we're going to die and all that. I mean, you have something called the Danse Macabre. The Danse Macabre means the dance of death. And this is going to be another example, like I said, of this whole morbid feel as everybody around you is dying. Okay, you're going to have the Danse Macabre being an allegory where it's portrayed a lot with death being personified, and that death is going to come and dance with all of us eventually. Okay, you can read down there that kind of fake old English. It's not really old English down there at the bottom of that one, but you can kind of um, read the poem down there if you want to. But basically, death is going to get every one of us. He's going to come and he's going to have a dance with us, whether we're rich or poor or young or old or whatever. Okay, so that's the Danse Macabre. It's an allegory representing death. Just another pictorial representation of the Danse Macabre. And another one. And here's another one that's later. This is going to be in the 1400s, a little bit later than the original, the big Black Plague. But again, here we have the Danse Macabre, the dance of death. And, again, you read there, because the plague struck at all levels, death, the Grim Reaper, is going to take a turn or, dance with a priest, a peasant, a woman, and a child. So it doesn't matter, old, young, rich, poor, all that. So the fifth, when we're listing the results of the plague, the fifth one is also pretty evident if you just think about it. The major results of the plague, number 5, is an improved lifestyle for the peasants who lived through it. Of course, because there's such a population reduction, so many people are dead, then you get cheaper land prices, more food. And here's the thing though, you end up with something called sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws are meant to regulate what you can wear. If you've ever heard of the color purple and the fact that only it's sometimes in history, in some places, only the royalty could wear it because it was so expensive to wear or to make purple clothing, for example. That's an example of a sumptuary law. It controls what you're allowed to wear. So the upper classes did not want the peasants to start dressing and then acting like they were nobles, so they had to make sure that there were certain things the peasants could not wear, okay, even though they had money. So, as I put on the slide right there, the plague is going to come to Europe several times, never as bad as it was. There's local epidemics a couple hundred years, but look at this. Parts of Europe didn't recover their pre-plague population. Say that 3 times fast. Pre-plague population until the 1600s, okay? That's a long time. Now, when I mentioned Boccaccio, he was living in what was it, the 16th century, I think. It may have been, let's see, I think it was the 16th century. It may have been the 1600s, 17th century. But you're going to have Boccaccio, and you're going to have in the 15th century, I believe it was that fresco that we saw. So the plague is going to come back every now and then. But again, it's never going to be as devastating as it was that very, that very first time that it hit Europe with all its force. Okay, well, I wish we could have all been in class together the entire semester, and I hope you've enjoyed the class, as it turned out to be. But I'll, of course, keep in touch with email right now and everything. But if you have any questions before you take the exam, it only covers these last two PowerPoints, chapter 10, which is the one about the Hundred Years' War and all that. And then there's this one about the Black Death. That's it. That's all that's going to be on your last test, okay? What we talked about on these two last PowerPoints. So you can do it. And yeah, keep taking care of yourselves.